Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see old friends here, many heroes here in the audience, and to make new friends. But I need to open up saying something we all know is true. Life is unfair. First of all, it's unfair to speak after Professor Schellenhuber. How am I supposed to keep you awake after such a wonderful lecture and discussion by him? Secondly, I feel it's unfair for the high school students here. Look at the problems we're passing down. But at the same time, I have to say, it's also unfair in a way that I'm getting this fabulous honor that I'm very grateful for. There's so many heroes working to revolutionize the way we think, our mindsets, our institutions, and the way we do business with each other and with the planet. One fair side to this is that working on these problems is so deeply satisfying, and I hope all the high school students will find their place in coming together as friends and working together from many different perspectives and along different pathways, whether scientific or more in policy or communications or art, to drive the change we need. And we know we're in a race against time, and I will present the same race that Professor Schellenhuber presented, but from the angle of nature, the living systems, the plants and animals, all part of the biosphere, the climate system, all interacting in ways that he touched on. But our point of entry will be a place I am very grateful for, Costa Rica, for all of the beauty I've had in my life thanks to this place and the people and animals there, and also for the inspiration, because it is one of the places with many heroes and where the revolution is happening in a very inspiring way. So let's talk about this race in Costa Rica. I want to get you in the mood, too, thinking about nature, looking at some beautiful scenery. When we look at a scene like this, what do we see? Many things, but we can see we can imagine the activity of people there, raising cattle for the wonderful products we enjoy, whether it's the beef or, as we become more vegetarian, milk, yogurt. My favorites are ice cream with chocolate, ice cream in many forms. And so in the foreground, we can imagine the many benefits that come from that part of nature. We can imagine the benefits to ourselves. We can also imagine the benefits to the farmers who use the land, who make their livelihoods there. We can imagine that governments know about the values from the land as they regulate what happens on land with policies and things. We can imagine that globally there are markets into which people distribute these products. And we have an idea of their value on the markets. But what about the land in the background? Look at this beautiful mountain range, the Talamanca in Costa Rica. That area is actually the biggest park in Central America. It's called the International Peace and Friendship Park, and it runs along the border of Costa Rica up here and Panama to the south. And that park area also has many, many values for people. But we're only beginning to get an idea of how to measure and think about those values. in regulating the climate, helping to stabilize the climate by holding a lot of carbon in the forests and in the soil in that area. There's also the wonderful genetic library of biodiversity held in that kind of landscape. You can look at the clouds forming over all of that forest and think about the hydrologic cycle, how we all depend so much on clean water and abundant water coming downstream to feed irrigation or hydropower. Hydropower is the biggest source of electricity, about 90% in Costa Rica, and it's a big export. We can think about the pharmaceutical products, most of our pharmaceuticals coming from plants, derived from places like that. But we are just beginning to develop these ideas about the values of places like this in the background. For thousands of years, really, we've had an idea about the land we manage, and we're at the earliest steps here, and yet in a race to integrate these values into our decision-making. So I'm going to tell you about the race as it has unfolded in recent times, starting with developing kind of a knowledge foundation about the values of nature and about developing a pathway to green growth that revolutionizes how we think about our economy and how we do business with the planet. How can we achieve green growth where we're investing both in nature and in human well-being at the same time? So this knowledge foundation started coming together in modern times when the natural sciences and economics and some policy started coming together, promoted in part by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and many other groups. One piece of this is to run scenarios, just like Professor Schellnhuber did for us in climate, and ask, well, how much opportunity is there to harmonize people and nature? When we look around the planet, we see that most of the planet in the productive areas has been converted to human uses. It's no longer wilderness. It's more like Satoyama or Satoumi in Japan, where you have a diversity of different uses and benefits coming to people. How much nature, especially in the tropics, can we protect in farming systems like this? Here's the edge of a pasture for livestock. Anybody know what this is? We, in many places, drink too much of it, coffee. It's the biggest export crop on the international market after oil, depending on the year. Millions of people working in coffee production on the whole supply chain. And then this is a little bit of forest, less than 1 hectare, which is typical in much of the tropics today that are hilly. People keep little bits of forest on the land that is steepest and least suitable for agriculture. But how much of the world's life forms, the machinery of our life support systems, could we support in agriculture? We know that globally we're losing about 50% of the different species that were on the planet when humanity became a real force. We could say in Professor Schellnhuber's wonderful movie, when the Industrial Revolution started unfolding, we're likely, from now into the future, to be the biggest force determining the future of all known life. So until the next asteroid hits this planet, it's what we do in farmland, more than anything, that will determine the future of all life, and certainly of our own lives. So people originally thought very little would live out here. It's hot, it's dry, The sun is very intense. How could a tropical forest animal or plant live out in the open? So over the past 25 years, my group and I have been trying to characterize the types of life that can live out in the open and the types of farming that we need to sustain life. So this is the royal flycatcher. The translators have been fantastic. They looked up all the birds, and so I can use the names. That's the female. You can see they get very tough when you catch them, saying hello to you, and hey, get your act together, people. This is the emerald toucanet. These are all captured out there in the heart of production, of economic activity, of rural livelihoods. This is the little scarlet-thighed honey creeper that goes around sipping nectar from flowers in the top of the trees and pollinating those trees. This is a bat. I don't remember exactly which one. You have to look at the face to see. I'm warming up the bat after it was caught in a net. And here's what the faces look like. It's fantastic seeing these crazy monsters at night. Here's another bat. This is the biggest bat in the Americas, in the New World. This one, the other bats fly around and mostly eat insects. Many of them control mosquitoes and other insects we would like to suppress. This one goes around eating the birds I just showed you. And then there are many other things. We've worked on all major groups of organisms, so reptiles, amphibians, and all together I'll just give you a summary of the 25 years of many different types of questions asked by different students. But what you see in yellow, or let's start with the green. In green you see the species in the different groups, the plants, the non-flying mammals, bats, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. You see what is restricted to forest. And the good news is that, it's about half on average that is restricted to forest, and therefore highly likely to disappear if we don't get control of the situation now. Tropical forest is burning up, basically, and as the climate warms, it will burn more quickly and easily. The good news is, though, that a lot of native species to forests seem able to live out in the crop fields and the pastures, or to live a life kind of at the edges of both habitats, making the most, kind of like in the Satoyama systems. So there is a huge conservation opportunity that we haven't been thinking about, of bringing farming and conservation together. You see a similar picture over here that of, these species are restricted to the big forest reserves and the smaller forest elements of 1 hectare or less. But a lot of the machinery of nature could be sustained, not all of it, but a lot in farming systems. So then you have to ask, though, why would any farmer want to protect nature? And this is where there's a lot of inspiration in Costa Rica as well. When you ask farmers, they all give you different wonderful reasons for protecting nature. So this man is making his living by having mostly forest on his farm and just small amounts of cleared land for gardens and for raising cattle. This man is producing coffee and similarly has many reasons for protecting forest around his coffee farm. This guy works on our team. He grew up as a farmer, is now a botanist, and is at university studying botany because he fell so in love with native tropical plants growing up as a farmer. This man lets us catch birds and all those other things on his land and produces about 150 different commodities on his very small farm of a few hectares. Many different medicinal plants and other plants with local uses and local markets. This lady is one of my best friends, Anna, and she also has a farm with about half forest and half coffee. And all of these people will tell you, especially these people, the Waimi people native to Central America, how important forest is, how it's basically everything, nature in their lives. Now, the science we've done tries to go further to help guide policy and decision-making when it comes to finance and management. And what we've done, talking with all these people working on their farms, their land, is measure the contribution of nature to farming livelihoods. So in the case of coffee, these are coffee flowers here. We see that bees pollinate the coffee, and actually we find that when the coffee is near forest, within maybe 100 meters of forest, you have a 20% increase in yield and a 50% increase in quality of the coffee. And that's because most of the bees live in the forest. They need nectar and pollen every day. And the only place to find that every day is in the forest. In the coffee, you find it only about 1 week per year when coffee blooms. Now let's look at the birds. There's a major pest on coffee that's very hard to control. There are no chemical pesticides, kind of thankfully, that control it. It's a small beetle that goes into the coffee berry and is protected in there, but eats out that berry. But with birds living nearby in the forest, you can control the infestation by 50%. In both of these cases, there's a big increase in income of about 8% to the farmers, and this makes all the difference in a coffee farmer's life. When it comes to bats, it's a way more complex story, and we can go out for a beer sometime and talk all night about bats. But it's a reminder, the bats do some helpful things, eating harmful insects. They also eat some of the most beneficial insects. It's a reminder for us to be humble and realize we are just at the beginning of understanding the role of biodiversity in supplying us with benefits. So with the bees, for example, guess how many types of bee we found on that farm? How many types in your mind? With about 700 different types of bee that we almost went blind trying to identify under the microscope. They all have different hairs coming off of the top of the head, and you have to count their hairs and look at how the hairs curl or split at the ends to distinguish the bees. But there have been now about thousands of studies over the past decade elucidating, shining a light on the role of nature in bringing us our health and our prosperity. What do we do? How do we go from studies to policy and governance? That's what I'll get into next. As we look at this recent history, so we started building the knowledge foundation for valuing nature in the early 90s. And then by the mid-90s, amazingly, some leaders, some visionary people, developed real-world cases of investing in nature. And Costa Rica was among the first of them. So this landscape here, it's in Costa Rica, a mix of coffee, banana, pasture, some tomato, and some forest. And in this country, first of all, in the early 90s, they had the highest rate of deforestation in the world. They were the poster child of tropical deforestation. But some pioneering policymakers, the president and the gentleman who developed, he was a hydrologist, and he developed the first ministry of energy and the environment, linking the two, because as a hydrologist, he knew how valuable forest is for hydropower production, soaking up the heavy rains during the hurricane seasons, and releasing the water gradually to hydropower plants for year-round supply, and holding the soil, preventing flooding and bad erosion and destruction of the hydropower investments. So they developed a payment system of $50 per hectare per year. Anybody could sign up. And they thought they would set the price very low to just work out the system, the policy and finance mechanism. But the people, they were overwhelmed with demand. Everybody tried to sign up for this program. All of those farmers I showed you in the pictures were eager to sign up. Everybody across the country saw the overall benefit of this kind of approach. And Costa Rica now has a net reforestation rate. And many other countries are trying to follow their model. I'm going to give you another pioneering case, one other, and this is New York City. So taking a quite different example, at the same time though, in the mid-90s, New York, about 10 million people in the city, depend on their water from upstream, about 150 kilometers north of the city. And yet, by the mid-90s, too many people were building these modest weekend homes up in the mountains to the north, right along stream sides. Here's a bridge with their lawns pouring chemicals into the waterway. And the water was becoming quite unsafe. First of all, the city officials looked into building a filtration plant to maintain the quality of water and the safety. But that was projected to cost $6 to $8 billion, a huge amount. So instead, they looked into paying the farmers and restricting some of the development, making it more sustainable up in that mountain area. And it turned out everybody went along with that. They improved the barns. This is a new solar barn that keeps the cows much healthier than the old-style, traditional wooden barns. And many of the communities, over 95% of the farmers and foresters became part of this program. And so we had 3 wins we could see from this payment, where the city is paying people up here to do things differently. First of all, people in the city are getting safe water at the lowest cost. Second of all, people upstream are being compensated for a change in their way of life and their practices. And what's the third win? Well, we can ask ourselves, would we rather have a romantic weekend away in a water filtration plant or up in the beautiful Catskills Mountains? You know, there are many, many other aspects that have been protected thanks to this pioneering policy. So then, based on these real-world cases and the new science, we came together in a large partnership of about 250 different institutions, academic, science, and implementing governments, development banks, other investors, and private sector to develop a universal approach where we developed the science and software to allow decision makers to account for the many benefits of nature in their decisions in developing or redesigning cities and out across landscapes as we develop in nations and regions. So the software is called Invest, and it's used now in about 180 countries. And that number makes me very happy. It sounds like a lot. In some, the change is very meaningful, as I'll show you in a minute, in Latin America and in China. In other places, though, I think there's probably one student in a country using the software. So we have a long way to go to accelerate uptake and magnify our impact. Let's talk about how to do that to mainstream and scale this effort. We're working directly in about 50 countries worldwide, and these are the primary demonstrations we're trying to make in these key sectors or key areas of vulnerability. So development planning, securing fresh water, making cities livable and sustainable, developing standards for reporting the impacts and dependence of companies on nature, and then along coastlines, developing climate resilience. So in terms of the mainstreaming and scaling, we'll go to two places, Latin America and China. In Latin America, basically, we're seeing the same mechanism that New York pioneered play out, where the downstream consumers in industry, in households, bottling companies, hydropower, agriculture, receive water from upstream. And they're now paying, often to communities a world apart, different languages, different cultures, totally different part of the economy. And our software lets them target the investments in key activities like forest protection, reforestation, or improving agriculture, and specifically where in the huge watersheds above the cities across Latin America. So you can see here for Colombia, the country of Colombia, in the Cauca Valley, for example, I'm just giving you one city. These are all the watersheds where the rainfall collects up here in the mountains and feeds down into the city. So this one watershed now will appear on its side. And you can see up here, the software will show where to invest in forest protection, where to have reforestation, where to add trees to pasture, where to add, these are around livestock facilities, to add a lot of plants along stream sides to trap the runoff, and in all of this to improve water quality. So the software will let you estimate the return on investment under different budget levels by the city investing in the upstream, how much the water quality or safety will improve under different initial budget levels. So now over 40 cities, the big cities, almost all of the capital cities in Latin America are using this software and achieving the 3 wins, not only of securing safe drinking water for the cities, not only for promoting more sustainable development up in the watersheds, including in Colombia, for example, in the peace process, paying especially these communities that have been in terrible civil war, but also protecting biodiversity and our life support systems, all the other benefits we get. And the same kind of win-wins are emerging now in what's becoming one of the most powerful countries, China. So Xi Jinping, I'm sure you know here, has been saying China's dream is to become the ecological civilization of the 21st century. And he's especially known for saying this here: clear waters and lush mountains are gold and silver. We will not trade them for gold or silver. And you can look at that and feel skeptical, knowing how much devastation there is in China with deforestation and flooding and terrible water quality, with terrible air quality, with destruction of the habitats, even of the most culturally iconic species like the panda. And yet, at the same time, I've been working there since 2008. There's a real seriousness in a big part of the academic and the policy community in China to determine where and how much to protect, how to secure nature and alleviate poverty through sustainable livelihoods, and how to move beyond the old measures, not only the old technologies that Professor Schellnhuber was referencing of the past, but the old ways of measuring progress, like GDP. So they're using our software. We've developed it together to map out the important areas in the country for flood control in blue and in this green, for biodiversity, always weighted equally at a national level, for sandstorm control, water purification, water supply. And that, about 49% of the country, is now zoned and has special economic investment to achieve the dual goals of enhancing nature and enhancing human well-being. 200 million people are being paid to restore natural capital in those zones. People like this, my student spent 2 days walking to this lady's house to see how the payments are working for real people. We've interviewed thousands of people in the deep mountains in China to see how to change her dependence on fuel wood to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner for herself and her grandchildren, how to transform in a way that is socially acceptable and desirable, as well as environmentally. And China has also developed the best system of natural capital accounts across the world. They have the data. They're not yet sharing the data, but they have the data themselves for mapping out at a very fine scale food production, carbon sequestration, sandstorm prevention. This was published last summer in Science, by the way. You know, where to invest in water supply, and then how biodiversity is doing. All of those services are increasing, we determined, since the year 2000, except biodiversity as part of nature is still declining. But they're creating this whole system of green finance where the wealthy parts of the country are paying the 200 million people, and soon it will be more people, to transform, to totally change how we do business across landscapes. And they're developing a new national park system as part of this. Finally, they're moving beyond GDP, like the French president called for, with many Nobel laureates in economics, to measure instead gross ecosystem product, the total value of ecosystem goods and services supplied annually, and to track that, and to reward or punish leaders for their performance in GEP. So when we look ahead, when we look past, in the past at the rapid change, sometimes I'm so impatient knowing about the urgency that Professor Schellenhuber makes us think about. At the same time, there has been really rapid change, considering the normal pace of change in society and knowledge. When we look ahead, how can we move from these individual demonstrations to a real tidal wave of change? What we're trying to do is scale in terms of capacity and impact to make, for example, there are many elements to this, and I know we're all working together in this room, but build up the natural capital platform that we can all use freely and openly with data, global environmental data updated as frequently as possible with new satellite technology and other sensing systems, new science relating nature across landscapes and seascapes to economic aspects of well-being, to health, and so on, through new tools to inform these payments, urban redesign and development, water security, and many other key areas. And we can hope in 10 years, say, that we'll have powerful demonstrations of how to make this transformation to green growth that begin to sweep across countries all over the world. Now, it might sound just like a dream. I'd say at this point, we're at a stage, my friend, who was a financial investor in Hong Kong most of his life, he's from the UK. He said his father would have him sail in a very small boat that his father sailed when he was about 9 or 10 years old, from England over to North America. And when they first left England, he had terrible seasickness. I feel we're at that point now, wondering if we're going to make it. But he said eventually, and amazingly, it was long before you can see land, you begin to smell land. And that at that point, he felt much more secure. And it seems we're at that point where we can start to smell land. We can start to feel in our hearts, in our mind, in our tummies, that we might make it. And on that note, I want to thank you very much for this opportunity and for all of the spirit and heroic effort you're bringing to this. Thank you.